nationwide and eventually lead to the takedown of a $60 million international crime ring. So today, not only will I show you what happens when you combine autonomous drones and glitter, and then what happens when you get into a chess match with a bunch of car thieves, but I'll end the whole series with an update on what happened to those massive scam call centers we infiltrated and exposed in India. Now, if you're new here, the 10-second recap is that after that package was stolen from my house, the police wouldn't do anything about it, even when presented with the evidence. So at that point, I knew that to avenge the theft, I was gonna have to use my engineering skills to go full Home Alone. And seeing how this is the final glitter bomb video, I think it's worth a brief recap of how the box design has naturally evolved over the years. Out of the gate in year one, it was a simple concept where when you took the lid off the bait package, this cup would spin, unleashing a pound of the world's finest glitter. And then hidden inside to record all the action, we had 4 phones, plus a canister of fart spray in an effort to encourage the thief to get rid of the box so we could go and retrieve it. And that went pretty well, so we spent the entire next year working on version 2.0, where we doubled the amount of fart spray and drastically improved the formula, which ended up nearly killing Macaulay Culkin.
Oh, I still smell it.
We also switched to biodegradable glitter and added a meaningless countdown.
4.
And some fake police chatter.
Seems the package may be in motion as well.
Just to make things more exciting. Then for year 3, we doubled the fart spray canisters once again to a total of 4 and added a handle the thief would be tempted to grab, which we covered in that super sticky mousetrap goop. And for the previous 2 years, the package thieves would often shove the lid back on right away, which covered up the cameras. So we added these posts near the top of the box that would passively pop out, which made it impossible to put the lid back on once you'd removed it.
14. 13.
We also added flashing police lights and made a doormat that had these conductive charging contacts so we could keep the whole box fully charged until the moment it was stolen. Then for Glitter Bomb 4.0, as soon as you touch the lid, it would get shot straight up into the air, compliments of these 2 boxing gloves attached to pneumatic pistons. We also added an actual car horn to make things more exciting and redesigned the cup so that by using the centrifugal force generated from spinning, you could passively get 3 chances to shoot some glitter instead of losing it all in one single shot. Then for the porch, we built a fake planter box that would slide over and hide the package at night so the homeowners wouldn't have to worry about bringing it in, and we were guaranteed to get it stolen in the day when the light was better. And all of that brings us to year 5, Glitter Bomb 5.0. I knew this was going to be the last year, so I decided to go for broke and attempt the biggest redesign to date. And this is a terrible idea, by the way. In engineering, if something is working well enough, conventional wisdom states you should basically change nothing, but pretend like you changed a lot. So for starters, last year we had 4 vials of fart spray for a total of 20 milliliters, and for this year, because we're not messing around, we have a 1-liter tank. And for those of you keeping track at home, that's 50 times more fart spray. To pull this off, instead of using a rotating cam system like before, now we have a peristaltic pump that continually forces the fart spray through 2 nozzles and basically never lets up. And because I can't exactly explain how much worse something smells over video, this is a sensor that measures the number of particulates in the air. And the more particulates, the more intense the smell. And if we place last year's glitter bomb in the chamber, it measures 250 particulates of nastiness per liter, whereas this year's tops out at 750. Which means it's not only gonna last a lot longer, but it's gonna be 3 times more intense. Now to house that massive reservoir of fart spray, we had to expand the footprint for the box, which means we had room underneath it to house the brains of the system on an upgraded custom printed circuit board that communicates directly with all 4 phones. And quick shout out to my friends at T-Mobile, because last year we found they had the best coverage when replacing the boxes, so this year they hooked us up and let us put them all on their network. Then for the glitter delivery mechanism, the idea was to hack some of these mini drones and rewrite their code to make them autonomous, where they could fly themselves without needing to be in communication with the computer. So the idea for this year is the thief would bring the bait package back to their house, then remove the lid, which would lower these 2 doors, allowing the drones to wake up and take off. And so instead of a single concentrated area of glitter from a spinning cup like before, the drones would just meander all around the house, leaving millions of tiny shimmering reminders not to take stuff that isn't yours. And as part of our code rewrite, if the proximity sensors register someone approaching, they'll just casually fly themselves to a different part of the room. And all of that perfectly sets up the checkmate, because while they're fully distracted dealing with the drones, the box starts to drastically change the room's air quality at a rate of 1 liter per minute. This design was ambitious and arguably had a much higher risk of failure in the field, but then we took it one step further by designing a sister box that could be used for a car break-in. Since I live near San Francisco, which is the smash and grab capital of the world, 2 years ago we went right into the lion's den, which placed the box in a somewhat alarming predicament. And while tempting, it seemed irresponsible to have a couple drones flying around inside a moving vehicle, so this box can be triggered remotely via text message and can activate the fart spray without needing to be opened. And then right before the nozzles kick in, this 360 cam pops up to cover all the action. And if at any point the camera senses it's being tampered with, just like one of those fancy hood ornaments, it will retract itself back inside the box. So after about 10 months of designing, building, and testing, we set them out on a bunch of porches and in a bunch of cars, and we waited. And we didn't have to wait long.
Brand new in the box, bro. Huh. Check it out. This is mine, homie. This is nice, homie. I forgot what you're not what happened with it. Pull out a gun? Yeah, that's it. I pulled out.
Activation complete. Recovery sequence initiated.
And I really appreciate the hustle from these guys, especially because when all is said and done, they just decide to make this their neighbor's problem. When we retrieved this next box, as you can see, it was completely destroyed and the phones were gone. But thanks to those blazing T-Mobile network speeds, we were able to recover the following footage from the cloud.
But our neighbor here, put it down there. Our neighbor here, the other camera.
Yeah. No way.
What? The new one, huh?
Yeah, it's the
Okay,
new
can we
version.
just leave it in the car for now?
Yeah, we'll leave it in the car.
Because we're not trying to.
Bring attention to it.
Let's pull it up and move along.
So they eventually took this home and were apparently pretty upfront with their kids about where they got it from.
It's a VR. You really want to have to have it? Yeah, you can make money and you can do the best. I want to open it. Let's open it. Oh my god, it's Mom, I think it is a bomb. Mom!
And in addition to porches, just like in years past, we placed some boxes by group mailboxes, so that way we could track the number of Good Samaritans that will call the number on the box from year to year.
It's for me and for you. Yeah, yeah. Scam. You YouTubers.
Activation complete. Recovery sequence initiated.
Switching gears for a minute, for the past 2 years, I've experimented with placing a glitter bomb in a parked car up in San Francisco because it's considered the car breaking capital of the world. And things are so bad now, it's not even just the parked cars that are getting targeted. They average 73 car break-ins per day, and at this point, people have resorted to just leaving their doors wide open, hoping the thieves can verify for themselves that there's no valuables inside, so they won't smash the glass just to check. And for the past 2 years, while we did get the glitter bomb stolen, all we could really do was just play an alarm sound so they throw them out. Because they never actually opened them in the car. And after doing some research, it turns out there's a reason for that. It's actually a fairly organized system called a fencing operation, where the cars will go out in groups, and then immediately afterwards they'll bring it to a middleman who will pay cash in exchange for the most valuable things they steal, like laptops. But the gut punch is that important documents like a passport or pictures or plane tickets don't really hold value for the thieves, so they just get thrown in the trash. And now that we knew they didn't plan on opening the box in the car, we designed the nozzles to poke through the lid so that even if they just threw it in the back seat, once the proximity sensor on the bottom registered it was stolen and the box texted us, we could track them using the embedded GPS, and a simple text message back would raise the camera and activate the fart spray for 2 minutes straight. So we headed up to the city and placed our modified car box nice and visible in the car and commenced our stakeout. And you can see this first black car rolls up and this guy gets out and spots it but doesn't take it. And then a little while later, this beige car rolls up and he sees it too, and the same thing happens. Then not too long after that, this white car rolls up and once again, they clearly see the box, but they just leave it sitting right there without even breaking a window. And after observing all this, our best guess was that it was the size of the box that was spooking them, so we removed the heart and all the other critical components from the large box and placed them into a smaller box. And while it occupied a smaller footprint, it maintained all the same functionality of the bigger box while still looking like an enticing item to steal. So the next day, we put it back out on the street, but this time someone came by and actually smashed the window. Only we didn't see them leave with the box. And our working assumption was that he just wasn't able to open the door to take it, but when we checked the footage, it told a different story. Not only did he once again intentionally not steal a smaller box, but the real reason for breaking the small window was to pull the back seat down and check the trunk. Which means if you take nothing else away from this video, you should know putting your luggage in the trunk is not a solution to keep it from getting stolen. The reason they break these little windows so often, but it seems like nothing is missing, is because they're pulling down the seat to quickly check what's hidden from view in the trunk. And at this point, it was pretty disappointing, but we realized they'd adapted. Word must have gotten out from stealing our glitter bombs in previous years that a juicy looking box like this sitting out in plain sight is nothing but trouble. And as an engineer, I never claim to have all the answers, but I know the process to get all the answers. And that's trying and failing and tweaking over and over again. So while we did have a couple useless car boxes and a busted window, we also knew their MO, which meant we now had a plan. And that plan was to shrink the box down even further to fit it in a backpack. That did mean we had to make some compromises, like losing the camera and reducing the fart spray reservoir down to this improvised pouch. But to make sure that it was still adequate, we sprayed it on this chair, and not only did it still last for 2 minutes, but we left that chair outside to air out and confirmed a few days later it was still in real bad shape. So with renewed hopes, we once again hit the streets, this time with 2 backpacks in 2 separate cars parked in 2 different spots, and as fate would have it, they both got hit within about 5 minutes of each other. Once again, you can see they're checking the trunk. And there's 2 interesting things to point out here. Number 1, if you look at the jacket on this guy and compare it to the jacket from the previous break-in, you can see it's the same guy, suggesting they probably work the same routes, which means they probably recognize regularly parked cars versus a new visiting car. So I felt especially honored that a trained professional like this fell for our backpack, even if it was possibly in a desperate attempt just to find a belt. And number 2, you can see just how quickly it all happens, even breaking the glass. The thing with tempered glass is it's really hard to break, until it isn't. And while this guy looks like Iron Man here, just casually pushing his hand through, what you don't see on his palm embedded in the glove is a sharp ceramic chunk or a spike of hardened steel, sort of like this. And as you can see here, if you have the right tool to concentrate the force on a really small point, it safely crumbles to nothing almost instantly. But more importantly than all that, now we had both boxes registering they'd been stolen while we tracked them both on their embedded GPS, watching as they made their way around, stopping periodically to hit more cars.
You can get too far right now. I'm not seeing that 30 side. I thought that was okay.
And after they each drove around for about 10 minutes, we sent a command to commence Operation Air Freshener. And unfortunately, because we had to condense everything down so small sort of last minute, the mic was in the same small box as the pump, so we don't know exactly what was said. But what we do know is that about 90 seconds after the pump started, the whole bag from the car. And the best part about this is that outside the backpack, the pump and spray are actually really quiet. So the only possible way they could have located the source is if they sniffed their way to the answer. And as our test showed, they'll continue sniffing it for weeks. And in the second car, it was a nearly identical outcome. Only in this case, because the pump ran a little quieter at one point, we got to hear them close in on the source. And about 20 seconds later, their backpack met the exact same fate as the first. Alright, so to wrap up, I'll just say that year over year, we've seen a decreasing number of package steals and a steadily increasing number of Good Samaritans. And maybe people are becoming more considerate, or perhaps everyone just knows what a glitter bomb looks like now, but I love the idea that at some point, someone's package wasn't stolen because a would-be porch pirate remembered these videos and had second thoughts. One thing that's not conjecture, however, is after so many of you actively shared our video where we infiltrated and glitter bombed those 3 terrible scam call centers in India, it got the attention of some international law enforcement agencies and from the press, and because of your efforts, those 3 centers that had each been in operation for more than a decade, doing upwards of $20 million a year, scamming the most vulnerable amongst us of their life savings, all got shut down with their top officials arrested. So thanks to all of you for watching and caring, and of course thanks to these 2, because without them, none of this would have ever happened. Being an engineer is the best because you can make whatever you can dream up. But what's the first step? Like, how do you get started down that path? Well, I'll tell you exactly how. It's called the Crunch Labs Build Box, and it gets delivered right to your doorstep every month, and then we build it together while I teach you all the juicy physics that make it work. It's basically like unlocking your own personal Mark Rover video every month, where you learn a new engineering principle that will have you not just building like an engineer, but more importantly, thinking like an engineer. So you're developing resiliency and problem-solving skills. On top of that, the toys themselves are really fun, like this super dope art machine where we learn about linkages, or in the spirit of the glitter bomb, this tripwire, which you can use to prank your family, or I suppose in some cases, yourself. So if you want to embark on this year-long journey with me, while there's still time to get it before Christmas, just head on over to crunchlabs.com or use the link in the video description, or we're giving away 2 months free as a holiday special. This is Matt Prater. He's the place kicker for the Detroit Lions. He holds the NFL record for the longest field goal ever, which means he's really good at kicking footballs. And this is a robot I made, which, not to brag, is also really good at kicking footballs. So to settle who's better between the 2 of us, we're going straight to Detroit. Mano a mano, man versus machine. But to do that, I'm gonna need an 8-second travel montage. NFL experience, and so I could soak up the fact that I had an entire stadium just to myself in the most professional way possible. We just got word Matt is about 10 minutes out. He thinks he's coming here just to teach me all about like the kicking mechanics and the science behind kicking field goals, which is partially true. I am curious. But the real reason I'm here is I built a machine that can kick really far field goals. I think it can kick it farther than any human. But if I'm really gonna test that hypothesis, I need to be kicking against the one human that can kick field goals the farthest, and that happens to be Matt Prater. Originally, a guy named Tom Dempsey, who had a unique kicking foot, held the record with a 63-yard field goal, and no one could beat that for 43 years. But then Prater came along and beat his record by 1 yard with a 64-yard field goal in 2013.
History is made!
And he still holds the record nearly a decade later. There he is. And not only did Matt show up, but to my absolute delight, he brought along his personal trainer. Who's this?
This is Pax.
What up, Pax? How are you, buddy? And so after I joined him for his standard warm-up and stretch routine, I went straight for the jugular. So do you practice just as much as everyone else on the team?
I definitely don't practice as much.
Everyone on your team is watching this like, oh, you can't.
Nobody wants to be the kicker until it's the end of a game and you need a field goal.
Then I asked him how to kick really long field goals, and he said it all comes down to just two things.
Leg speed.
Leg
I'd say is
speed.
First.
And leg speed makes intuitive sense, but then he told me the second critical factor is making contact 2.2 inches up from the bottom of the ball. Extensive research has been done that backs up these two factors as the most critical for maximizing distance. So after that, he showed me the proper technique to achieve those two factors.
So you come at an angle so your plant leg should be as close to straight as you can, and then at this angle.
Give me a red dragon, please! Yes, finally! What's that? A Hydra?
Luffy's so good with his Devil Fruit that it is basically the only power that he needs for the entire first half of the story, but then this happens. And he suddenly realizes that he needs top tier Haki similar to the likes of Shanks or even Roger so that he can actually survive in the new world. And then after seeing how overpowered he becomes using Haki in the second half of the story, I just couldn't stop wondering how strong Luffy could have been if he never ate his Devil Fruit at all and instead had trained only Haki ever since he was a kid. And this would most likely happen all the way back when Luffy first got his Devil Fruit, because let's assume that the Red Hair Pirates don't completely lose track of, I don't know, the single most valuable Devil Fruit in the world. And so when hungry child Luffy is looking around for like a little snack to eat, Shanks actually keeps the treasure box with the Devil Fruit out of a small child's reach. And even though Kid Luffy is desperate to see what's inside that box, Shanks says no. So goodbye, Scratchy Luffy. But of course that's not all that's gonna be different, because even without his rubber powers, he's still the impulsive kid that we know and love. So when he insults those bandits, he's still going to get captured, taken out to sea, and has to be rescued by Shanks, because even though he can now swim, yeah, he's still no match for this monstrous seeking right here. And so now we get the first major twist, because when they get back to land, Luffy suddenly has a ton of questions about how Shanks actually managed to scare away that Sea King. And now, since this version of Luffy doesn't have his Devil Fruit, Shanks actually decides to show Luffy the very basics of Haki so that he can grow strong and protect himself. And of course, I'm talking specifically about armament and observation Haki here, since Luffy hasn't actually awakened his Conqueror's Haki quite yet. Although I do guess it's possible that Shanks could assume that Luffy has Conquerors because of his dad and grandpa, so he might even tell Luffy about all three powers right out of the gate. However, this is of course where we run into our first major debate, because when Shanks is about to depart in the original story, he gives Luffy the Straw Hat as a kind of symbol of his belief in the young boy that he can also become a strong pirate. At least that's what we always thought, but there's also the very real possibility that Shanks only tried to inspire Luffy in the first place because he ate this particular Devil Fruit. And that's of course because Luffy's Devil Fruit is extra special, and we can only assume it is required in order to actually become Joy Boy and find the One Piece, which Luffy just managed to achieve in Wano way later in the story. And so now the big question is, would Shanks still give up his hat if Luffy doesn't have this Devil Fruit? And I'm honestly not quite sure, but I do like to think that Luffy's personality would still inspire Shanks. Plus, it is still possible for Luffy to find Laugh Tale and become Pirate King technically without becoming Joy Boy. I mean, Roger did it, so let's just assume that Luffy still does get the hat, and Shanks even tells him that he might even tell him more about what was in that treasure chest when Luffy actually comes back and becomes a great pirate. Which now leaves us with the absolute crazy scenario of Luffy growing up training his Haki instead of his Devil Fruit powers. I mean, can you just imagine him running around the Goa Kingdom blasting off Haki punches? He would be insanely strong, and I honestly think that his grandfather Garp would actually be quite happy to see his grandson learning Haki so early that he might even decide to train Luffy personally occasionally, which ultimately means that Luffy's fighting style will be quite similar to that of Garp's, where he mainly fights with his fists, which I mean, Luffy does even with his rubber powers anyways. Although I do suppose there is technically still a chance that Luffy would eventually learn to use a weapon, since most Haki-only powerhouses like Roger or Shanks still use a weapon as well, but then again, Garp here doesn't. But in fact, I actually think I have the perfect weapon for Haki Luffy to use, which we'll discuss a little bit later on, but first, Luffy would probably also awaken his Conqueror's Haki during this time growing up. Perhaps that time where he was captured by the bandits, or maybe even when Sabo died. Which means that by the time that Luffy's ready to start his pirate adventure, his Haki skills have leveled up from kind of noob to at least advanced, if not already master, and he's basically at the same level that he was right after the time skip. But we'll see very soon just how long he can actually survive without his Devil Fruit. And what you may not even realize though is that not having a Devil Fruit is actually going to save his life more than once in the East Blue, because while most of the enemies in this part of the story were fairly easy to beat, yes, you may have forgotten that Brother Luffy almost drowned twice. Once he was thrown off the Baratier, and once when he dropped into the water like an anchor while fighting Arlong. And so yeah, both times he actually had to be saved by others, but that is no longer a problem at all, because this version of Luffy has no restrictions with swimming, so defeating his enemies becomes a simple problem of smashing their faces with his Haki-covered kicks, and I guess punches as well. Plus, I mean, his observation Haki will help him dodge attacks pretty easily, like for example Arlong's spinning torpedo. I mean, he would even be able to probably break weapons using his Haki-infused attacks as well. But of course, the maybe most insane part of Luffy's new abilities is that he would definitely be able to overcome his very first defeat against the Logia Fruit using Captain Smoker. Because if you remember, Luffy only really struggled against opponents who actually had a Logia-type Devil Fruit, because, I mean, he could simply not hit them without either knowing their elemental weakness or, yeah, having Haki. But that's literally not a problem at this point in time, because once Luffy figures out his Haki punches can actually hit Smoker, I don't think there is any way that the Marine Captain will be able to defeat Luffy. Which, when you think about it, might mean that his very first Haki might actually end up being a way higher heading into the Grand Line, which might actually be a serious problem a little bit later on. But at this point, I also think that we should mention that if Luffy knows so much about Haki, he most likely would also teach other members of the crew what he knows about Haki. Although, let's be honest, he's probably not the greatest teacher, and he might just tell them to figure it out on their own, kind of giving them like a rough explanation. But being around Luffy himself and seeing him use Haki abilities could mean that characters, especially like Zoro and Sanji, do figure out how to use Haki much earlier in the story. And as a result, a much needed early major power boost for the entire crew. Which of course takes us straight through the Alabasta Saga to the eventual clash with the Warlord Crocodile. And now, in the original story, Luffy had to fight Crocodile not once, not twice, 3 times, and there's no doubt that he would have died each time if it weren't for help from either other people and also a ton of luck. But once again, Haki is just going to completely change these fights, because the ability to actually hit Logia Fruit users is just so overpowered that Luffy should be able to deal heavy damage to Crocodile basically right away. However, that isn't to say that this fight would be super easy, especially since Luffy can only basically attack from close range since he can't stretch his body. But then again, Crocodile might also just be super surprised to find someone in this part of the world who can already use Haki, so really there's no doubt in my mind that Haki Luffy would find a way to win and save his friend Vivi's kingdom. Okay, so far so good for Haki Luffy, but let's see if he can actually survive against the strongest characters like the one coming up next. And that's because things are about to get impossibly difficult when the crew flies up to Skypiea, because it's here of course that they come face to face with the lightning god Enel, and Luffy is going to need a massive power boost to actually take him down. So let me explain why. In case you forgot, the only way that Luffy was actually originally able to defeat Enel, who was a crazily overpowered fruit user, was because of his rubber body's natural immunity to electricity. In other words, Enel's insane main attacks were basically useless. But that advantage is now completely out of the window, so at this point Luffy is in quite serious danger of getting one-shotted by this electrical powerhouse. And yes, just like with Crocodile, Luffy can easily damage the Logia Fruit user with his Haki, but the problem is actually getting close enough to Enel to do so. Because I mean, it doesn't matter how hard you punch if you get your heart fried before you ever get close enough to actually attack. But then again, Skypiea also might be the perfect opportunity to introduce 2 new power-ups for Haki Luffy. Because one thing that we know for sure about Luffy is that he's basically a Haki prodigy, which means that he is extremely good at learning the basic and advanced techniques of Haki. So I do think after pushing his observation Haki to like the absolute max when dodging Enel's lightning bolts, it might be realistic for him to actually awaken advanced observation Haki during this fight. And doing so would let him see a few seconds into the future and give him a huge advantage dodging attacks and kind of getting close to Enel. But if that still isn't enough, Luffy also gains another huge bonus by not being a Devil Fruit user. That's because in the original story, we already saw that this Shandian warrior uses Sea Prism Stone to help him nearly kill Enel. And normally, Sea Prism Stone drains the power of any Devil Fruit user, but now that Luffy is Devil Fruit free, he could also somehow use these stones to gain an advantage against Enel. I mean, really, I can just imagine Usopp somehow making him some Sea Prism Stone brass knuckles or something so that his punches would be extra damaging to any Devil Fruit user, which, let's be real, is almost every single one of Luffy's fights. So with all of this put together, Haki Luffy with his knuckles should be able to take down Enel and save Skypiea somehow. But of course, all of that is not actually going to be enough to save Haki Luffy from being completely overwhelmed by Admiral Aokiji. I mean, even in the original story, he was just completely washed by the Admiral's Ice Logia powers, and even though Haki Luffy in theory will probably land a few blows, still don't think that he even comes close to having a chance to win this fight, but we'll see if that's still the case the next time that Luffy actually fights an Admiral in basically just a minute. However, while they eventually survive that encounter with the first Admiral, Luffy's missing Devil Fruit will play a major role in the outcome of this next battle. Because after Robin was kidnapped by the World Government secret agents from CP9, Luffy needed not one, but 2 massive power-ups to defeat the Leopard Man Rob Lucci. Those, of course, would be Gear 2, which gave him an incredible boost in strength and speed, plus Gear 3, which allowed Luffy to increase the size of his fists. But again, these upgrades are completely gone now. So what is Luffy going to do now? Well, there are a few options I think that could work here. First, Haki Luffy could just be so stupidly overpowered at this point that he beats Luffy even without needing any upgrades at all. And honestly, I think that is actually perfectly valid, but if in some case that doesn't satisfy you, then we can also consider that the entire crew is probably way stronger from seeing Luffy's Haki in action, so perhaps Zoro and Sanji also defeat their opponents much faster and easier, and they can all team up to kind of fight with their captain and take down Lucci. And so either way, I think it should be easier than ever for the crew to free Robin, escape Luffy's grandfather Garp, and then just breeze through Thriller Bark, let's be real, to reach Sabaody. However, this is where things are actually going to go absolutely crazy, and it all starts by you hitting that nice red subscribe button for more One Piece content just like this. But here in Sabaody is actually where Haki Luffy will truly be tested for the very first time. And we can assume that Luffy's advanced observation Haki will actually help him make sure that this mermaid never gets kidnapped in the first place. However, that still takes a lot of fun out of this arc, so let's just imagine that Luffy still somehow punches a world noble, which still means that Admiral Kizaru and the Cyborg Pacifista still come to hunt them down. So here is, I think, where Haki Luffy is really going to shine. Because if we assume that he's actually starting his journey with Haki skills as good as right after the time skip, then he should be able to crush the Pacifista, no problem, right? I mean, just look at what he did to this one before they left for Fishman Island. Plus, he's grown stronger through all of his fights, so honestly don't really see the pacifistas being all that big of a problem for any of the Straw Hats, really. Which does mean that we have to ask if they would still need to be separated by the warlord Bartholomew Kuma. I mean, I do think that Luffy at this point might put up a way better fight against Kizaru, but he still wouldn't be able to take him down alone. I mean, just read the manga right now. So if Rayleigh is there to hold off the Admiral, there's a pretty great chance that the crew would escape together somehow. On the other hand, if Kuma was really determined to send them all off across the world, there is really nothing that Luffy could do about it at all at this point. I mean, Haki isn't going to stop the awesome powers of Kuma's pushes, plus they wouldn't be able to go to Fishman Island quite yet without having a coded ship. So let's imagine that the story kind of follows the normal path and they all still get separated like they used to. And now, before we see the huge impact that Luffy's actually going to make at Marineford, we first have to look at his path getting to the Epic War, which would go pretty similarly to the original, I think. Although on the Island of Women, the pirate Empress Boa Hancock might fall in love right from the start because of Luffy's overwhelming conquest haki and of course kindness. But Impel Down, on the other hand, wouldn't change all that much. He still wouldn't be able to punch the Venomous Warden, so no big changes here, I think. However, when Luffy finally does drop into Marineford, I could definitely see him actually charging straight into the war with his full Conqueror's haki blazing. And can you just imagine the insanity of an entire battlefield of Marines and pirates turning to see this madman dropping down from the sky? A bunch of the weaker enemies would probably just drop unconscious on the spot, and it might even force an admiral to come after Luffy right away because he's an unknown threat at this point. And speaking of the admirals, they are honestly some of the few characters who can actually stop Haki Luffy at this point. I mean, them plus Garp, Admiral Sengoku, or the world's strongest swordsman Mihawk, of course, are truly their only hope at this point. Because honestly, even someone like Doflamingo, I don't really think could stop this level of Haki Luffy with his current power level. So Luffy would definitely square off with someone like Kizaru, but instead of being easily sniped like in the original war, Luffy would put up a more than decent fight at this point because of his advanced observation and the fact that he can actually hit the light Logia fruit user, which, as a result, might mean that the Whitebeard pirates actually stand a way better chance of succeeding in rescuing Ace, because if Luffy is taking the attention off of an admiral all by himself, that means that the strongest allied pirates, like the Emperor Whitebeard, Marco the Phoenix, and the escaped prisoners like Crocodile and Jimbei, would get much, much closer to actually rescuing Ace. But sadly, just because Luffy is way stronger, that doesn't really mean that he's strong enough to win a one-on-one with an actual admiral, so let's imagine that he gets away and frees Ace just like in the original story. Oh, hold on, wait, that just means we're gonna head straight to Donut Ace again, right? Aren't we? Let's find out. Because with Luffy's advanced observation haki, he should be able to actually sense Admiral Akainu coming and at least dodge his fiery magma fist, but he honestly wouldn't be able to actually run away forever, and even if he is able to block a magma punch here or there, then it would most likely just send him flying all across the battlefield. And then with Whitebeard still suffering his normal heart attack, that unfortunately leaves Ace to once again killed by Akainu. Almost, Ace. Got so close this time. So with the major turning point once again over, let's assume that Shanks once again arrives, stops the war, and Luffy escapes like normal. I guess he would still be knocked out from the shock, so I guess that doesn't change at all either. Which gives us one major question to ask. Would there still be the need for a time skip in this scenario? Because if you remember, Rayleigh came to train Luffy with the main goal of teaching him haki, but since Luffy already is well on his way to being a true haki master, is that even still necessary? Well, honestly, yeah. In our version of the story, the rest of the crew is still very much separated, and they could definitely use time to train. Plus, I do think it would still be a huge waste for Luffy to not train with one of the few legitimate most Haki masters in the world, so let's assume that Rayleigh does train Luffy for the normal time skip, but instead of learning basic Haki, Rayleigh puts him through a brutal training regimen that actually helps him master all advanced armament and possibly also advanced conquest even, especially after everything he experienced during the war. Although I must admit that Luffy probably wouldn't master this last one quite yet fully because, as we know, Haki truly blooms mostly during intense battle. However, all of this means that after the time skip, Haki Luffy and the Straw Hats are way more overpowered for the rest of the new world, and honestly, I could just see this version of Luffy one-shotting and soloing the post-time skip opponents like the roided up Fishman, this Gasman, which basically just leaves Luffy to fight against the Emperor's Big Mom and Kaido, and during the Whole Cake Island arc, we could get one of the most interesting clashes against Big Mom's strongest son, Katakuri. Because for much of the original fight, Katakuri didn't really respect Luffy as a fighter, and for very good reasons. Katakuri was clearly stronger with his superior armament Haki and future sight Haki, but in this version of the story, there is no doubt at all that Luffy has the upper hand. And so I would actually wonder if Katakuri would even go as far as to fight Luffy directly, or would they even clash at all? I mean, Luffy might just be able to kick him off the ship, which would allow the crew to just coup the burst away from the Sunny. Also, Luffy might end up having a way longer clash with Big Mom during this arc, but since his original goal was just go in, rescue Sanji, and go out, I don't really think that they just like have an all-out clash at this point quite yet. So, on to Wano Kuni, and the biggest controversy yet maybe, because this is the scene of Luffy's highest test so far against the strongest creature in the world, Kaido. And honestly, I'm gonna drop a hot take here, because if Luffy is facing Kaido while already having a ton of experience with advanced armament Haki, future sight, and he understands the basic of advanced conquerors, then I truly don't see how Kaido can beat our Luffy here. Because Luffy was beat down so much during his original fight with Kaido, and it wasn't until he actually learned advanced conquerors that he was able to actually do any real damage to the King of the Beasts. And although Luffy even had to awaken Gear 5 to eventually beat the Oni Dragon, by this point he was already super exhausted. So if Luffy has basically his strongest abilities from the very start of the battle, I mean maybe even right after coming to Wano, then I think his insane willpower, durability, and overall Haki mastery will just lead him to defeat Kaido once and for all, way easier and faster than before. But, and this is a big but, that leaves us with a super important question, because without unlocking Gear 5, can Luffy still become Joy Boy and bring freedom to the world? Well, honestly, I think no. I mean, it was pretty clear in the original story that it was only after Luffy awakened his Devil Fruit and Gear 5 that this giant elephant officially recognized him as Joy Boy. So without his legendary Nika Devil Fruit, it just isn't possible, I think. But remember that little promise that Shanks made to Luffy at the start of this video? Let's discuss that more in just a moment, because from here, I think Luffy has a pretty clear, even path to finding Laugh Tale and becoming Pirate King. And we do know that he doesn't need to be Joy Boy to find Laugh Tale, since Roger was technically able to do it. So the question would be, could Luffy still use whatever treasure was left at Laugh Tale to go on to save the world without actually being Joy Boy? Well, we're not 100% sure, but this could also be the perfect time for Luffy and Shanks to meet up, and if Shanks has been holding onto the Nika Fruit all this time, then he could very well offer to Luffy right now if he truly believes Luffy to be the right person to become Joy Boy. And while I don't even know if Haki Luffy at this point would all of a sudden even want to eat a Devil Fruit, and even if he did, it might take him some time to awaken it, but if this is a required step to save the world, I could see Luffy ending up doing it. Or who knows, maybe he just eats it again by accident. Which, you know, might be a little bit disappointing since he came all this way with just Haki, but since he's already eating one Devil Fruit, why don't we even make it a little bit more crazy by giving him a second Devil Fruit as well? Which, yep, sounds completely wild, but can you imagine if Luffy had 2 Devil Fruits at the start of the story? So, if you want to know which powers would best combine with his original fruit and how it would completely change his adventure, you can watch that video right here. Thank you very much to MainGrader 4434 who suggested this video. If you have any cool ideas for any what ifs, feel free to drop them in the comments. And yeah, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Did you know that Whitebeard used to look like this? Or that Big Mom went from this happy little child to eating her friends alive? Or that Frankie almost joined Goldie Roger's crew as a kid? Well, today we're gonna look at every single backstory in One Piece. Starting with the oldest character that we know of, which is this elephant? Well, you see, this is actually a highly intelligent creature the size of 4 Mount Everest that was already alive during the Void Century, and that was a companion of the legendary character called Joy Boy. The elephant's name is Zunisha, and what we know for a fact is that it committed such a terrible crime that as a punishment, it has been ordered to walk the oceans for over 800 years, waiting for the return of Joy Boy. Not only that, but during this extremely long time, a race of human-like animals called the Minks ended up building an entire country on its back. And speaking of super old characters, we also can't wait to learn more about other mysterious people from the Void Century, like Joy Boy, who probably used to have Luffy's legendary devil fruit. Or Oden's wife Toki, who time traveled to the future. Or the secret king of the world, Emu, who seems to have been ruling from the shadows for all this time. In addition, characters like the Gorosei may also well be from the same time period as well, so hopefully Oda has a giant backstory prepared for us to explain the Void Century and all of the people who lived and fought during these last 100 years. And speaking of giant-sized backstories, we're moving on to these two giants who are some of the oldest characters in One Piece. Dory and Broggy are a crazy 160 years old. Both of them grew up on the island of giants called Elbaf and later formed their own pirate crew of giant warriors. However, at some point they started a really petty fight over who had hunted the larger animal, and so when Luffy and the crew meet them, they've actually been dueling for exactly 100 years. Which actually ended up creating a lot of trouble for the rest of their crew, because without their captains, the two giants Oimo and Kashi were later blackmailed by the world government into working for them, with the government pretending that they had captured their friends. And this guy here called Hairujin, he ended up as a gladiator fighting for the entertainment of others inside the massive arena on Dressrosa. But even bigger and older than these giants though was Ors. While he lived 500 years ago, this ancient giant was 159 years old at the time of his death. Allegedly, he was a terrible villain called the Continent Puller, and after ravaging lands across the world, he froze to death in the icy northern continent, waiting for the day that Moria would dig him up and revive him as a zombie. However, Ors also had a descendant called Little Ors Jr. Now, Little Ors Jr. was an ally of Whitebeard and helped during the Marineford War to free Ace because Ace had once gifted him a straw hat from the land of Wano. However, the first straw hat that we're actually going to talk about today is the oldest one, Brook. This talking, singing skeleton has one of the most tragic backstories in all of One Piece. His crew, the Rumba Pirates, were friends with a young whale named Laboon. Little Laboon loved to hear Brook's music, but when the crew entered the Grand Line, they had to leave Laboon behind, promising that they'd meet back again one day. However, getting stuck in the Florian Triangle, which is basically the One Piece version of the infamous Bermuda Triangle, his entire crew slowly died of starvation. However, thanks to his Yomi Yomi no Mi, Brook was revived after death and kept living on as a skeleton. He was cursed to continue wandering the mists of the Florian Triangle until he joined the Straw Hat Pirates. However, thankfully, even death couldn't get rid of that sweet, sweet afro. And up next is the former Fleet Admiral of the Marines, Sengoku. While he's now carefree and living his best life in retirement, we know from this childhood drawing that Oda made that he was actually very disciplined. Because as a child, we can see him practicing his calligraphy here, preparing him for a very long career of filing paperwork for Garp. Because on the other hand, this childhood drawing of Monkey D. Garp gives a very different impression. Garp is Luffy's grandfather, and we can definitely see the resemblance to Luffy because Garp absolutely looks more like a pirate as a kid than a Marine. This wild child would grow up to be the hero of the Marines. He took down terrible criminals like Don Xinjiao, whose head he punched so hard it went from being pointy to round. Now, Don Xinjiao would never forgive him for ruining his perfectly spiky head and would try to carry out the grudge against Garp's grandson, Luffy. Not only that, but Garp also had a friendly rivalry with the Pirate King Goldie Roger. This pair of frenemies teamed up at God Valley to fight the Rocks Pirates. Now, we don't know anything about his past or where he came from. All we know is that Rox Diesebek has collected a crew of some of the most powerful pirates in the world. Legendary characters like Whitebeard, Big Mom, Kaido, Shiki, or Stussy. With this crew of absolute monsters, Rock's ultimate goal was to destroy the Celestial Dragons and become the king of the world, but in the end, was defeated by Roger and Garp together. And after the incident at God Valley, Garp became known as the hero of the Marines and Roger would become Pirate King. So let's talk about him for a second here. Some things that we know from Roger's past are that he originally owned Luffy's straw hat before passing it on to Shanks, who then in turn passed it on to Luffy. But most importantly, along with Kozuki Oden and the rest of his crew, he was the first person to ever reach the final island and find the One Piece. Whatever this treasure was, it must have been really funny because Roger burst out laughing when he found it and he decided to name the hidden island Laugh Tale. For some reason, he had arrived to the treasure too early in his own words, and unfortunately, he also had contracted a deadly disease. And so he did everything in his power so that the right person would be able to find the island once again. After that, Roger turned himself into the world government and announced the existence of the One Piece to the world, starting the Grand Pirate era as people scrambled to find his treasure. However, before he died, Roger did one more thing. He had fathered a son with a woman named Portgas de Rouge in secret, and before his execution, he had asked Garp to adopt this son. Even though Roger was a pirate and Garp was a marine, he trusted his longtime rival more than anyone to see to it that his son had a chance to live his life despite being related to the most wanted criminal. And Garp actually agreed to adopt that son, who would go by the name of Ace and was raised as Luffy's brother, but we'll get to that in just a bit. First, we have to go back a little bit though, because we just skipped over some massive names right here. Let's talk about the remaining members of the Rocks pirate crew, 3 of whom would even go on to become Emperors of the Sea. I mean, just look at this picture of Whitebeard as a kid. Can you believe that this guy grew up to become the world's strongest man? Not to mention that he used to have a serious nice head of hair. It does seem like he never did have an actual beard though. Now, Whitebeard grew up on this island that was too poor to pay the insanely high taxes to the world government and therefore had to defend itself from pirates and bandits on its own. This turned Whitebeard into one of the most powerful fighters in all of One Piece. And his crewmate Charlotte Linlin was the sweet little girl here who didn't know her own strength. Her parents had abandoned her on Elbaf, where her hunger pains led to her absolutely bodying some giants. Little Hydrogen, for example, who we mentioned earlier, was even there as a kid as well. Fortunately though, Mother Caramel was here to raise Linlin inside her orphanage. Unfortunately though, Mother Caramel was also a scam artist who sold orphans to the world government. Double unfortunate, at the world's worst birthday party, Big Mom ate all of her friends and Mother Caramel alive along with her devil fruit, gaining her soul powers. After that, Big Mom built her food-related empire, attracting numerous husbands along the way. Kaido was another Rocks pirate with a seriously messed up childhood. Ever since he was a kid, he was used as a human weapon due to his immense strength. And then after a period as a government test subject, he found his way to the Rocks Pirates, where Big Mom gave him his dragon devil fruit. And while he was a government test subject, he also broke out a fellow prisoner, Arbor, who he then renamed into King. And King is the last known member of the Lunarian race, a mysterious race with black wings, dark skin, light hair, and fire-related powers. In fact, King is the one that teaches Kaido about the myths surrounding Joy Boy, which then leads Kaido to want to set up his base of operation inside Wano. And since the two were being experimented on in Punk Hazard, this is likely where Kaido first encountered Queen as well, since Queen previously worked with the other scientists of Mats. This is a research group created by Dr. Vegapunk. Another notable Kaido crewmate is Who's Who. This member of the Flying Six used to be a CP9 agent until Shanks stole the Gomu Gomu no Mi that he was responsible for guarding. After this, Who's Who was imprisoned by the government but was eventually freed and became a subordinate of Kaido, hiding his true identity. And later on, Kaido would encounter one of his fiercest enemies with Kozuki Oden in Wano and have the fight of his life. We already mentioned Oden a little bit earlier since he sailed together with Roger to Laugh Tale, but we have got to take a minute to talk about this Giga Chat's true past. After growing up as a troublemaker, Oden was named the daimyo of the lawless land of Kuri by his father, the shogun of the Wano country. This is where he gathered his 9 retainers, the 9 red scabbards: Kinemon, Benjiro, Kawamatsu, Ashura Doji, Nekomamushi, Inuarashi, Hiku, Raizo, and Kanjuro. Alongside with them though fought others as well, like the bewitching ninja Shinobu. However, after a chance meeting with Whitebeard, Odin went to sea to explore the world outside of Wano. And while they were sailing, he met his wife Toki, a time traveler from the Void Century, and they had their 2 children, Momonosuke and Hiyori. Later, after swapping crews from Whitebeard to Roger, he then went to Laughtale and then finally returned to Wano with the goal of opening its borders. Unfortunately, in the time that he'd been gone, Orochi had pulled a power play with the backing of Kaido to gain control over Wano. Orochi was part of the Kurozumi clan who sought to take revenge on the Kozuki clan for past conflicts. He even went as far as installing Kanjuro, another secret Kurozumi, among Odin's retainers. Finally though, after a climactic battle, Kaido finally executed Odin while his retainers fled to the future using Toki's powers. This ended up sealing Orochi's position as the Shogun of Wano, and it led to terrible times on Wano for the common people, like for example Tama. However, during Luffy's brother Ace's time on Wano, he met Tama and gave her hope for the future. And while he was there, Ace also met Yamato, Kaido's son, who was inspired to adopt the name of Odin after seeing his bravery during his execution. However, despite being extremely supportive of Yamato's newfound identity, Kaido was otherwise a terrible father figure, locking her in explosive handcuffs and confining her to Onigashima for her entire life. So now we can move from Wano to Egghead Island, where we finally met the eccentric scientist Dr. Vegapunk. This genius was inspired to uncover and decipher the secret knowledge lost to the world after his friend and colleague, Professor Clover, was killed at Ohara. And as the leader and founder of the science group MADS, he also used to work with other crazy scientists such as Vince Judge, Caesar Clown, and Queen. Of course, while Vegapunk secretly works with the Revolutionary Army, he keeps up appearances by making technology for the world government. And so let's talk about the Marine Admirals. Now we don't know much yet about the past of the original 3 admirals, but Oda has drawn all 3 of them as children. Borsalino appears to have always just been as carefree as he is now. Sakazuki looks like he had a very rough childhood. I'm willing to bet that his absolute hatred of pirates was inspired from a very young age. And Kuzan appears to have been extremely disgruntled and possibly a victim of childhood alcoholism. Seriously, why is baby Aokiji carrying that bottle around? As for our other admirals, we don't actually quite know much about them yet. We do know that Fujitora blinded himself after seeing terrible atrocities in the world, and we're super curious about what those atrocities were. And Aramaki, on the other hand, is still a complete mystery. We know nothing about him. And another even more mysterious character, indeed one of the most mysterious in the whole series, is Luffy's father Dragon, the most wanted man in the world and leader of the revolutionaries. Recently, in Dr. Vegapunk's flashback, we learned that the destruction of Ohara is what inspired Dragon to join together with Emporio Ivankov and Bartholomew Kuma to form the Revolutionary Army. However, it's still to be seen what traumatic event caused Dragon to become an absentee father, because it seems to be all too common in the One Piece world that just throwing kids in the jungle is the equivalent of a daycare. Of course, having the parent present isn't always a good thing though, like for Big Mom's many traumatized children. At age 50, Perospero is the eldest son of Big Mom, followed by the triplets Katakuri, Alban, and Daifuku. Now, we don't have full backstories on all of the Charlotte family because the most detail we get is from Katakuri, Brûlé, and Pudding. For example, we know that Katakuri's other siblings would make fun of his huge donut-eating mouth, calling him a pelican eel. Why they went with this obscure deep-sea creature instead of just calling him a pelican is a little bit of a mystery though. After Katakuri beat them up in response, his brothers took their revenge out on Brûlé, scarring her face. Afterwards, Katakuri began covering up his mouth. In his mind, he was doing it to protect his siblings, as well as cultivating a serious image. Pudding, on the other hand, spent her entire childhood being ridiculed for her third eye, even being called hideous by her own mother. So really, the Charlottes aren't what you would exactly call a loving and supporting family. Let's now move on to the Shichibukai though. First, Gecko Moria. Moria was once an idealistic young pirate with his sights set on rising to the top of the One Piece world. However, after challenging the Emperor Kaido, his entire crew was mercilessly killed. And him losing his entire crew is what would inspire him to use a zombie army in the future, because he can lose his crew and relive the pain if they're already dead. To replace his old crew, he gathered followers like Hawkback, a skilled surgeon with a twisted reputation. Because Hawkback helped Moria stitch his zombie army together, including Sindri, who was a famous stage actress in life that was resurrected as a zombie by the mad scientist. Absalom, another crew member, had his face partially spliced with a lion to better resemble the predator that he is. As we can see from this drawing though, Corona has pretty much been a goth girl since day one. It's not just a face with her. Bartholomew Huma, another warlord we encountered on Thriller Heart, was known as a tyrant and served as the ruler of the Sorbet Kingdom. He's also Jewelry Bonnie's father, and he was also a prominent founding member of the Revolutionary Army, but was converted by Dr. Vegapunk into a cyborg in service of the world government. Kuma was also used as the basis for the Pacifista robots as well, and we already got a glimpse that Kuma might have the single most traumatic past in the entire story of One Piece. Now, Crocodile was the very first warlord that Luffy ever defeated. We can't tell a whole lot about Crocodile's past, but we do know that he has a grudge against Whitebeard. In addition, we also know that he has a deep, dark secret that only Emporio Ivanko knows. And while working with Nico Robin, his organization Baroque Works decided to try and steal the throne of Alabasta, while Crocodile secretly saw the ancient weapon Pluto. And it should be noted that Crocodile as a child is very gender ambiguous, but do with that information what he wants. Crocodile plotted against Nefertari Cobra, the beloved ruler of the desert island Alabasta. His daughter, Princess Vivi, is even an honorary Straw Hat member after their travels together. And as one of the original 40 kingdoms that founded the world government, the Nefertaris regularly attend the revelry. As a child there, Vivi encountered Wapol, the monarch of the Grand Kingdom, who showed his true colors by slapping her while she was still a child. And while in Alabasta, Vivi also grew up as a close friend of Koza, who would eventually lead the rebel army fueled by Crocodile's lies and deceits. As children, Vivi joined Koza's Suna Suna Club, and later these brave kids once actually saved Vivi's life from kidnappers. Jinbei, the Knight of the Sea and current Straw Hat Pirate, got his start on the Sun Pirates under a captain called Fisher Tiger. Fisher Tiger was once enslaved by the Celestial Dragons. After his escape, he single-handedly scaled the Red Line back to Marijua and released the rest of the slaves there in a legendary one-man assault against the world government capital. Later, the Sun Pirates branded themselves with the symbol of the sun to cover up the Celestial Dragons brand that they were marked with as slaves. In fact, all members of the crew received a sun brand so that people couldn't differentiate who was a former slave and who was not. The sun symbol itself, of course, being related to the sun god Nika, who we now know was worshipped by slaves as a god of liberation. And the Sun Pirates also escorted a former slave who would then grow up to be the revolutionary Koala back home as well. However, they were attacked by a squad of Marines and Fisher Tiger was shot. Eventually, Fisher Tiger died, needing a blood transfusion. However, due to his hatred of humans, he couldn't let himself receive blood from a human and passed away. Afterwards, Jinbei and Arlong fought for leadership of the Sun Pirates. In the end, Jinbei gained control of the crew, eventually becoming a warlord in order to better the terms between the government and Fishman Islands. Arlong, meanwhile, formed his own Arlong pirate crew and moved to the East Blue, where he constructed Arlong Park. Now, not a lot is known about Dracula Mihawk's past either. We know that he was a longtime rival and friend of Shanks, at least until Shanks lost his arm. We also know that before becoming a warlord, he was known as the Marine Hunter, which is pretty badass. Another former warlord, Don Quixote Doflamingo, is a Celestial Dragon. However, after his father left their position as a Celestial Dragon and they left the Holy Land, they moved to the sea only to be met with hatred and persecution by the people there. And so eventually Doflamingo killed his own father, but it was too late to regain his position in Marijua. And so after being taken in by Treble, the young Doflamingo then began on his path to becoming an infamous and cruel pirate. And eventually he claimed the kingdom of Dressrosa, the Don Quixote's family's original ancestral home, as his own once again. Before Doflamingo's invasion, Dressrosa was a peaceful kingdom led by the king Riku. Kiros, a legendary gladiator who became captain of the Royal Guard, even married King Riku's daughter, and the two had their own daughter together named Princess Rebecca. The family lived happily until Doflamingo used his string powers to manipulate Riku, causing him to cut down his own citizens. Now Kudos made a stand against the Don Quixote pirates, but one of Doflamingo's subordinates named Sugar used her devil fruit power to turn Kudos into a toy soldier. And the side effect of this power was that everyone forgot that Kudos had ever existed. However, the toy soldier version of Kudos still helped raise Rebecca, teaching her how to defend herself, as Riku and Rebecca were both forced to compete in Dressrosa's Colosseum for their own survival and the Don Quixote family's entertainment. And another set of Oda's drawings from the SBS section of the manga treat us to some of the Don Quixote family members as children as well. We can see that Treble has always been disgusting, and also see a young Diamante, Pika, Laoji, Macvice, Giola, Gladius, and Monet. However, of course, the Don Quixote family member with the most fleshed out backstory is none other than Senor Pink. Senor Pink's backstory came seemingly out of nowhere, but managed to tug on fans' heartstrings and is considered among the best in the series. Long ago, Senor Pink fell in love with a woman named Russian. Together, they even had a child named Gimlet, but all along, Russian didn't know that her husband was part of a crime family and a pirate. Unfortunately, Gimlet passed away as an infant from illness, and afterwards, Russian learned the truth behind Senor Pink. She ran away, but was caught in a landslide, causing her to fall into a vegetative state. Senor Pink would visit her every single day in the hospital, and one day would put on their baby's hat while expressing grief over their son. And his wife actually reacted by smiling despite being in a coma, which led to Senor Pink dressing more and more like a baby to get a reaction from his beloved wife. And so Senor Pink still dresses as a baby to this day. It's just a hard-boiled thing to do. But while Doflamingo was a celestial dragon, our next Chichibukai was a victim of the celestial dragons. Boa Hancock, the Empress of Emerson Lily, was enslaved by the celestial dragons as a child along with her two sisters. However, she was then later set free during Fisher Tiger's attack on Marijoa. Hancock has also known